Welcome to our discussion part of the doc side. I hope you've enjoyed watching Abraham's Children, the documentary we presented before the break. With me to discuss the documentary are two guests who know what they're talking about. First, Igal Hecht, who's a documentary maker. You've been on the program before. Good to have you. And for the first time on our program, Noka Dakrub, who's a social worker and political activist. Good to have you with us too.
Thank you.
I guess the first question is, my opening comments to the program where I was asking myself, why was this documentary made? And I'm going to ask you that question. Why was it made?
I think the documentary was made because, A, the director felt passionate about it. It was made in 2006, and during that time, the first 10 years of 2010, a lot of documentaries were made about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I found that the documentary didn't really add anything, but it did educate you about the conflict and about what's been happening since Oslo, and especially the Second Intifada.
Okay.
I think it was made to shed a light on the issue, and I think that's important, just to bring a bit more awareness to what's going on. And yeah, a lot of people already know about what's going on, but there's a lot that was discussed on it. The documentary seems to have a bit of a hopeful, theme to it. I can call
at the beginning of the program, I put it in context by saying 2006, the year the documentary was made, was the year that Ariel Sharon ceased to be leader in Israel, and it was also the year that Hamas came to power in the Palestinian territories. And I think that's part of the context of this, it seems to me. What I was interested in was bias in the documentary and in its making. I noticed that what the Israeli government calls security fence is kept repeatedly referred to as a Berlin Wall. Let's talk about the bias. You have some thoughts about that?
I don't refer to it as a Berlin Wall. I refer to it as a security barrier.
Okay.
The documentary does raise a lot of good points, especially when you look at East Jerusalem, places like Bet Safafa and Abu Dis, where the wall does absolutely cut off the life of, destroy the lives of Palestinians. There's no doubt about that. And I don't think anyone can argue that. And it's horrific and it's tragic that it does that. At the same time, the security barrier came as a result of terror attacks on Israel. What the documentary fails, and maybe because of the year that it was made, what the documentary fails to include is the fact that in the beginning the Israelis didn't want the security barrier at all. The Israeli government, specifically Sharon, did not want it. It was an outcry from the Israeli people who suffered tremendously through numerous bomb attacks on buses, it goes on, that created the barrier. Why they refer to it as a wall? Again, that's the director's choice. I disagree with that.
Okay.
But it also, what they forgot to mention specifically is the fact that since the barrier has been up, there's been a decrease of 90% of terror attacks on Israel, and not for lack of motivation on parts like Islamic Jihad or Hamas.
Okay. Your response? And
I think calling it the new Berlin Wall or something like that is not really helpful to the situation. And I think we have to look at the Middle East in particular and the world on a case-by-case basis. We can't necessarily say, well, this is kind of like the situation over here, so let's just give it the same thing, the same name. There's a lot of issues that are going on in the Middle East, and yes, you're right. There has been a decrease in terror attacks simply because it's harder. And it is not because they haven't been interested, but how long is that going to go on? Is that a short-term solution? Is it possible to sort of, in the documentary it shows, sort of building bridges and peacemaking within, with the younger generation. Is that the solution? Because as long as there's going to be hate that is being taught by generation after generation, someone's going to pick up a gun.
Absolutely. No, it's absolutely true.
Yeah, to me it seems, okay, I'm an outsider. We're outsiders, we're Canadian. But from my observation, I look at the situation and I say, okay, Israel, I said this at the beginning of the program tonight. Israel, stop building settlements. It's an irritant. It's a major irritant. Stop right away. And then I would say to the Palestinians, hey folks, recognize they're there. They've been there 60 years, they're not going away. Is that so difficult?
That's easy for you to say.
Very easy.
We solved the conflict.
Right, not a problem. But I think local politics has a lot to do with that. In terms of why settlements are being continuously built. There's a lot of, and like you said, the wall, the security barrier was not something that the Israeli government wanted to do, but there was an outcry from people. So there's a lot, there's a lot of involvement with local politics as well, and Israeli politics and just politics in the region. And then, we can say, oh, why don't you guys just solve the problem? There's a lot more than.
Well, what would I'll ask you to speak on behalf of the Palestinians for a second.
Sure.
What would Palestinians want that could lead to a lasting peace? What would?
I think. I can't really speak on behalf of Palestinians, but I think the Palestinians want what you and I want. They want to send their kids to school without worrying about, them coming home. I think they want a state. They want a viable state.
Yeah.
They want a state that is economically sustainable and that has a government that works, and that and there's a lot of challenges that come with that. That's not going to happen overnight. Mm-hmm. So, as we're learning from Egypt, actually.
That's true.
Yeah.
They don't do that overnight.
Yeah.
What do the Israelis want? I'm assuming that's, or what do the Palestinians want? I can't speak for Palestinians. I can't speak for Israelis. But
you heard what I said about just stop the settlements.
Stop the settlements.
Why not?
Good question. Why not? I've spent 3 years with settlers up in the hilltops of the West Bank, making a film about them. One of the reasons that they say that they don't want to stop settlements, they don't see it as a solution from their point of view, and again, speaking from their point of view, is the Gaza disengagement. They say that Gaza proved that the Palestinians are not interested in peace. And that's something, again, the movie sort of glazed over, didn't really deal with it, which is surprising because it is such a major event in the last 10 years. But, from their perspective, from the settlers' perspective, they removed 10,000 settlers from Gaza. And what the return was, over 10,000 missiles on the south of Israel.
Yeah.
So from their perspective is, why are we going to move from the West Bank, from Judea and Samaria now, and make it easier for them to launch missiles on Tel Aviv, on Netanya, on Kfar Saba, etc., 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 on Ben Gurion Airport, right? When people think of Israel and Palestine as being such a major, big country, when it's such a small piece of land,
you drive
it really
end
is.
to end of Israel. When I was in Israel back in '83, what I was left with was just a tiny little piece of land that upset the whole planet. It's the whole area is too small. The planet's got the wrong focus, it seems to me. It's a tiny little piece of land.
Well, people are suffering on both sides, so you can't just, completely.
Right. I'm simplifying.
Yeah.
but I do have this question. Mm-hmm. There are Arabs who live in Israel, have lived in Israel since it was founded in '48. I'm not going to comment on the quality of life they lead, but they do have elected members of parliament, and they live in it. Would it be possible with an independent Palestinian state for Jews to continue to live on the West Bank or in the settlements and say, yeah, we'll become Palestinian citizens? Would that be at all possible? Because it seems to be an assumption that's never going to happen.
I don't really know if anybody wants that to happen, to be honest. I don't really think that that's the way. I don't know what's going to happen 200 years from now.
No.
If the issue is solved and there's a two-state solution, and people sort of, there's going to be a forgiving process and things like that, and grief and loss and all of that, and that's going to take some time. But I don't know what's going to happen 200 years from now and where people are going to decide to live. That could be a possibility. I don't think it's going to happen next week.
No.
Or the week after.
There's too much anger.
About 10 years, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, it all depends, once again, on who you ask. Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the Palestinian president, has recently said that no Jews will live in Palestine on that land. Flip side, though, settlers do want to live, and some have, in fact, and I know this from talking to them and documented this in various films, want Palestinian citizenship. Or, yesterday, for example, a settler leader basically said, let's make everybody Israeli. And it's funny, because what the settlers are doing, if they actually want to have that happen, is create a de facto binational state, which is the destruction and the end of the state of Israel as a Jewish state. So it's interesting that from both sides you have these solutions that one could look, if Mahmoud Abbas's solution is having no Jews there, one can look at it as a somewhat racist solution. Yeah. And the settlers' solution, some of them, their solution is basically really leading to the end of the state of Israel as a Jewish state.
Yeah. See, one of the things that always strikes me with this kind of documentary is, while it talks about an Israeli occupation I never hear talk about Jordanian occupation of those same West Bank from 1948 on. I never hear that. Let me stretch this a little further. I never hear about Syria's occupation of Lebanon, which has gone on for an awfully long time, or the Iranian and Iraqi and Turkish invasion of the Kurdish lands. You never hear that as an equivalency. Why?
I think it has to do with the politics in the Arab world and the Arab League. It's easier to sort of pick an enemy, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend, rather than to actually talk about the issues that have been going on everywhere. I mean, there's been atrocities in Jordan when it comes to Palestinians,
Yes.
and in Lebanon.
Yes.
No one talks about these issues because why bothering in terms of
It doesn't further anyone's agenda.
Exactly. It doesn't further anybody's agenda. It's easier to just focus on one enemy at a time, at least.
The Palestinians have been pawns for everybody in the Middle East, including Israelis, right? Including Israel. They've been used by everyone in the Middle East to further their agenda. And really, that's the tragedy of the Palestinian people, and that's the tragedy of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about bias in the documentary, and certainly some of the subjects covered in the documentary when we come back. Please stay with us.